Hello, everybody. I am your writing coach, and this is the quote-pocalypse. That means we're going to be talking about quote lead-ins, quote in-text citations, and works cited pages today. Lots of fun stuff. Everybody loves formatting, right? Hopefully I'll make it a little more fun. Let's jump into it. Don't want to keep you waiting. All right. We're going to put our best quote forward. Yes, I like puns. Deal with it. So many quote puns. I'm so sorry. Every quote deserves a quote lead-in to introduce it. I'm going to bring these up, but don't worry, I'm going to go into more detail in just a moment. So here are a few ways we can lead in a quote. We can use a full sentence followed by a colon to introduce a quotation. Not my favorite option. Personally, I don't use this very often. I prefer the second one, where you begin a sentence with your own words and then complete it with quoted words. Another great option is using an introductory phrase naming the source, followed by a comma to quote a critic or researcher. Another one I don't use as often is a descriptive verb followed by a comma to introduce a critic's words. I think it's still a very solid option. I like basically every option but number one, but I still bring it in there because it is still a viable option. Just because I don't like using it doesn't mean you won't like using it. So it's okay to have a different opinion than me, but my 2 cents is the first option kind of sucks. For number 5, it's more of a rule. You don't have to follow your stuff with a comma if your lead in ends in that or as. Kind of like with the second one, if you're beginning with your own words and completing it with quoted words, chances are you're not going to need that comma unless there's a natural pause in your writing. If you're naturally pausing when you read it out loud, you will probably need that comma anyways. Let's see some examples. You can use a full sentence followed by a colon to introduce a quotation. Some examples being, the setting emphasizes deception. Nothing is as it appears. Notice they're 2 separate sentences being joined together by this little colon. Then the second one, Piercy ends the poem on an ironic note. To every woman, a happy ending. So they go together, and yet they are 2 separate sentences, joined together with this tiny little colon. I'm not a fan. Not my biggest option. Not the option I'm going for right away. But it's okay to have this option in your back pocket in case that's something you prefer to do. It's not a bad option just because I don't like it. And that's why I included it. Begin a sentence with your own words, then complete it with quoted words. My personal favorite. I am very biased. Hamlet's task is to avenge a foul and most unnatural murder. See how it perfectly flows together? It makes it feel like you never even left the warm comfort of your own words. I really like that. The speaker is mystified by her sleeping baby, whose moth breath flickers among the flat pink roses. Now, you may notice this little slash. Don't be too alarmed. That's just because this is a poem that they're quoting. And if there's a line break in the poem, there's a little slash to tell you that. So don't be afraid if you see that in some quotes. That just means that they're quoting a poem. If you need help quoting a poem, feel free to stop by. I'm happy to help. But you shouldn't have to do that in MO1A. That's usually an MO1B type of assignment. Using an introductory phrase naming the source followed by a comma to quote a critic or researcher. According to Smith, you'll notice the comma because there's a pause, writing is fun. These 2 are the same thing, the same quote. They didn't feel like writing it out, and I don't blame them. That's a mouthful. But in Smith's words, writing is fun. In Smith's view, writing is fun. Can you tell what we're pushing at the writing center? Writing is fun. But notice that it changes up how it's saying it, but all of these are introducing Smith and mentioning that he's going to say writing is fun. This also can change your in-text citation. You'll still have one, but you might just have the page number because you already introduced the person. This is also Smith's last name. This is not his first name, if you're curious. Use a descriptive verb followed by a comma to introduce a critic's words. Smith's back again as he states, "This book is terrific." Such a positive guy. Smith remarks the book is terrific. He writes the book is terrific. He notes the book is terrific. Notice these are all verbs that are describing what Smith is doing. These are all options as well. I don't use it as often. I like to have a little more nuance to my introduction to a quote. But it's still an option to have, and you'll notice that he's naturally pausing, so there is a little comma there. Keep that in mind. It can make or break the flow of your paper, not the content itself, obviously. So when you're looking for flow help, quote lead-ins, having commas or not, depending on how you're doing it, can make a really big difference. Quote lead-ins in general can make a big difference. Don't follow it with a comma if your lead into the quote ends in that or as. Here are some examples they have, and one where you would use a comma. Would, not wouldn't. I'm going through it. Smith points out that millions of students would like to burn this book. Smith emphasizes that millions of students would like to burn this book. See the that, see the lack of comma. In Smith's view, comma, millions of students would like to burn this book. So again, it depends on if you're doing that natural pause. Do you need to pause before you start talking about the quote? Or is it something that flows better without that comma? Because if I said it with that, if it was like, Smith emphasizes that, it's kind of weird that I stopped there. It feels like I cut myself off. But when I say something like, in Smith's view, it's kind of normal for me to cut off there and wait a minute, take a little breath of air. So that's kind of why sometimes you don't need that comma with your quote lead in. So that's an option you have as well. The world is your oyster. Write your intro however your heart desires. As long as it reads well and follows with the prompt, you're good to go. Now let's talk about in-text citations. You may notice that I've had them at the bottom of each page because this is not my example, and I am no thief. So here is a little brief guide on what your references need when you're doing an in-text citation. In-text meaning it's in the paper. If you're quoting in the paper, if you're paraphrasing in the paper, that's when you need an in-text citation. Just in case you're wondering, paraphrasing means anytime you're taking information and putting it into your own words, but that original information came from a different source. So if it's not from your own mind, if that information, even though you're putting it into your words, if the information came from a website or a book or a person, you need to cite them as your source to avoid doing something called plagiarizing and getting a plagiarism citation. Those are pretty big deal at Moorpark College, pretty big deal at any college, so we're going to be careful. We're going to say better safe than sorry. If there's an author to your source, your in-text citation will look something like this, where you have the author's last name, or if you have a page number also, it would be the author's last name and page number. An example would be if the source was me, it would be Hernandez, or Hernandez on page 1. You'll notice I don't say page, I don't put a number. It's literally just the number itself and the last name itself. No commas, no nothing. If there is no author, some websites don't credit authors, you'll see that instead of an author, you might have title of article. Now that'll be in quotations and it will still have those trademark parentheses. This is also why I recommend not using parentheses in your paper as like some weird inner monologue, because it can get mixed up with the in-text citations. So yeah, parentheses are a big deal for in-text citations, and it's kind of where readers can be like, oh, that's not the author's words, that's someone else's, right? Or that's someone else's hot take, not the author's. You being the author of your essay. Here is your works cited checklist. Make sure you stop and check before you send it off to the tutor. Is your work cited in alphabetical order? It doesn't matter if it's a article title or a last name. Both would come first depending on if there's an author or not, right? It will be alphabetical order overall. If the title starts with A and the author starts with B, the author's coming after the work with the author starting with B will come after the title piece of work that starts with A. You're going to make sure it's MLA format, that's Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, as is the rest of your paper. And you're going to have something special called a hanging indent, which I will show you right here. See the title. It says Works Cited. It's very simple. It's not bolded, it's not underlined, but it is center of the page, top of the page. Everything else is not centered. It's going to be hanging to the left, and you're going to have something called a hanging indent. Now, getting one of these is different depending on whether you're using a Word document, a Google document, or even a Google Slides presentation like mine. So you are going to have to change up how you get that hanging indent, but they will all look the same. They will all be 0.5 inches. You'll notice a hanging indent, unlike a normal indent, starts on the second line instead of the first. You'll notice that they start with the author's last name on the work cited, and it's in alphabetical order. Matthew Alcott starts with A, so he comes first. Gregory Bell starts with B, so he goes second. Chariot Charlie, or Charlie Chariot, starts with C, goes after Bell and after Alcott. Now, hypothetically, if we said, oh no, there is no author for this Charlie Chariot piece, and it instead said a chapter in a lost collection, that's an A with no letters after it, it would actually go first, and Alcott would go second. But because there's an author, we focus on the author's last name. Basically, whatever comes first in your works cited is how you're going to alphabetize it. And like the rest of the paper, it will be double spaced. Here's my example of a works cited because I use sources on this. You'll notice it's in alphabetical order, and neither had authors because they came from college websites, and usually college websites will not credit the person who wrote them, which I think is stupid. But that's my opinion. Purdue University has some great resources on works cited pages. I love them for MLA and APA formatting. As you can see, I used MLA works cited page basic format for some of my visuals and some of my examples. For introduction quotes and quote lead-ins, I used Columbia College's resource on suggested ways to introduce quotations. Neither had an author, so I waited and did it based on alphabetical order, and so it's MLA works cited page and then suggested. You'll even notice I've been quoting it the whole time properly with its quotes and its parentheses. I will say I did this a little bit wrong, but specifically because I wanted you guys to see the link in case you wanted to go use it. But normally you would cite that as MLA works cited page basic format, which I should have done. My mistake. Even tutors make mistakes too. So, if you guys want to use those resources, please do. They're great. I love them. If you want me to send you those resources, please reach out. I'm welcome to send them. And if you have some questions on how to get a hanging indent on whatever format file you're working with, you can also let me know. I'm always here to field questions, comments, concerns, and I'm always happy to help, and I hope this helped you just a little bit. You guys have a good rest of your day, and good luck with your works cited and quote lead-ins.